This is a podcast for heroes, unapologetic seekers of excellence, and those convinced their destiny is greatness. Welcome to the Sovereignty Studio Show, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we have Aleks Svetski in the house. Alex, thank you so much for being here.
Mike, thank you so much, bro. I'm really glad to be here with you boys.
Awesome. So, let's start it off.
Let's do it.
You've written a book.
Yes, another one. Another one. This one's a behemoth. I wrote this book 8 times, just so you know. Like literally, it started in 2022. It started with a very different premise. The idea was to Eric Kaysen and I. We did a podcast on the. Have you heard of the show Shogun or the book?
Yes.
Yes. So written by James Clavell, fantastic book. So we had discussed that, and we called the podcast Bushido of Bitcoin back then. So this was a couple of years ago. And it gave me an idea for a book, which became this. And the original idea was, are there emergent virtues occurring in the Bitcoin space that could be considered like a Bushido, like a code of virtue or a warrior code or something like that? And that was the original incarnation. I was trying to find that. But the book evolved into something else because around the same time, I kind of exited the Bitcoin space a little bit. I kind of went down some other rabbit holes, like some of the dissident spheres, the right-wing thinkers, the Spenglers, the Nietzsches, and all this sort of stuff. And the book started to evolve in a different direction. It became more about looking at which civilizations or cultures of the past which cultures of the past produced civilizations of greatness. That was sort of the question or the theme. But as you know, 2023 was a tough year. So I mean, I don't know what it was like for you, but definitely for me, it was a tough year. And as I wrote the book, I found myself really yearning for the past, talking about a return and the past was better, the present sucks, the future is bleak, and all this sort of stuff. But after, I don't know, the book, after about the 4th or 5th draft, I brought on an editor who's fantastic. His name's John Carter. He's got probably the best Substack on the planet, honestly. This guy literally spits fire when he writes. He's one of the best people I've ever read. And I brought him on as my editor, and he sort of pushed me in a couple of directions. And as I started rewriting the book, draft 6, draft 7, the book took on this ascendant energy. And that's kind of the Ross Stevens quote that you opened up with.
Yep.
That sort of sums up literally what the book is, the energy that you feel reading the book. So anyway, long way of saying, it's been 2 years in the making, 130,000 words, 2.5 pound monster of a book that I wrote 8 times and transformed me as a person.
Wow. So first of all, congratulations on getting it out. And I know you had been working on it for a while. I remember it just a couple of years ago. You hit me up and sent me a draft.
Coming soon.
Yeah. So congratulations on that. I'm curious, why write the book?
Man, in the book, I say I wrote it for myself, right? And initially, it was because I was convinced that there was this emergent phenomenon in the Bitcoin space, right? So that's sort of what led me down that path. And at the time, I was interested in writing more content. That's where I wanted to go. I wanted to write more books, and I just finished the Uncommunist Manifesto, and that did quite well with Mark Moss. And that was sort of the original, I guess, inspiration. But in the same way the book morphed and I morphed, the reasoning behind the book transformed as well. I wanted to create a playbook for the leaders of the future. And if I kind of loop that back to your original question, why for me? I think it's the same reason why someone like Bukele wants to rebuild El Salvador, or why a man wants to become a father, or why Alexander the Great wanted to cross into Asia and reach the ends of the earth, right? There's something internal to those of us who choose to be sentient. Nietzsche, I guess, calls it the will to power, right? You want to reach for something, and that desire to reach, that desire to claim space, that desire to conquer it's in the European spirit, right? That's its genesis. And I don't know, I guess somewhere I have it inside me, and it compelled me to produce and discover this. That was I must say, I did not expect to write this book. It sort of came through me somehow.
Around here, we talk a lot about the low time preference, the values that come from proof of work, and just this new culture arising from Bitcoin. And personally, at least in my experience of watching Bitcoin evolve over the years, it almost seems to be a fairly new phenomenon. You said you started this in 2022, where the narrative is we're starting to talk about, wow, this changes us as people. This changes us on a deeper level than just fix the money, fix the world type of conversation. And when I read the sample chapter last night, that was my first thought. I was like, wow, we're finally bringing like personal development in mixing that with Bitcoin, and how it's literally been happening, but now it's like a conscious intent, like with your book here. Like, hey, this is it. Let's take it. Let's conquer.
I think there's some truth to that. I'm a little bit more skeptical of that Bitcoin did that to us. I had an epiphany while writing the book as well, which is I actually think Twitter did it to us, less than Bitcoin. It just so happened to be that Bitcoin Twitter became a place for us to exchange ideas.
Interesting. Wow.
And I think Twitter in that sense is way more important, because you look at, I mean, Elon's takeover of Twitter was the most important thing that's happened to civilization probably in the last 100 years. If it wasn't for him, Trump wouldn't have won. Like, he literally, you know that meme where the car is like going this way and then it kind of like skids off to the right? Like, that's what civilization just did. And I think that can be pinpointed to the point where Elon decided to grow some balls and actually take that on and allow for the collision of ideas. And it just so happened that there was a lot of a collision of ideas among Bitcoiners on Twitter. So I don't know if it's a purely Bitcoin phenomenon. I have a feeling it's got more to do with Twitter.
But are you saying that started happening since Elon bought Twitter? Or was that
I mean, it
Bitcoin,
started
Twitter
happening before, obviously. Right. It started happening before. But now that Elon's done it in general to Twitter, the communities I'm a part of on Twitter now, like, I don't give a fuck about the Bitcoin community, honestly. Like, the quality of discourse on the Bitcoin community on Twitter is very low in comparison to the new groups that I found. Way fucking, like, way more vitality, way more energy, way more intellect, way more strength, way more courage. Like, all I see in the Bitcoin community is fucking people bitching about number go up and, you know, who they're angry at and fucking lolbitarians and shit like that. Exactly. It's all fucking gay, honestly. So I don't know. That's why I'm like, I'm a little bit skeptical on that. I don't think Bitcoin necessarily, I mean, it's an ingredient because it does lower your time preference. And ideally, with a lower time preference, you change your behavior. That's really what time preference is. It's a behavioral thing. That being said, I think that Bitcoin attracts people with a predisposition for a lower time preference. So I think you have to have those ingredients beforehand. Bitcoin also attracts losers and degenerates and all that sort of stuff. And you see that all of those guys become shitcoiners, morons, you know, NGU junkies and all that sort of stuff. But there's something about Twitter and that kind of public square discourse that I think had a greater impact. And if you just infuse the Bitcoin element in there, we found our way to those ideas because of that discourse.
So speaking from my own personal journey, right, I can kind of see that, right? One of my biggest gripes with Bitcoiners in the past has been this idea that just because Bitcoin exists, everything's going to be all right.
Correct. Yeah.
And I always felt like, no, we actually have to act, right? We have to build the world that we want to see. And Bitcoin simply by itself is not going to change anything. What happens when you become rich off of Bitcoin, but you haven't really leveled up as a person, right? What do you do with all that wealth?
Yes.
It's just going to amplify all those negative qualities that you have. Yeah. And so I kind of see what you're going with that, right? And I see the time preference shift in me happen, but it's happening gradually over time, where my plans have gone from, 3 months out to 6 months out to a year to now 10-year projects, but it took a lot of, wrestling with the idea of spending my Bitcoin and always going through that kind of deliberation in your mind of, do I spend the Bitcoin now? Because if I spend it now, it's going to be worth more in the future. And over time, your mindset just shifts to a lower time preference.
Totally. I was talking about this with someone the other day. We were talking about how spending your Bitcoin is often like, by people, they're like, oh, you shouldn't do it, this and that. But I mean, look, in order to build a better future, you need to invest, right? And when I look at, so my last company that I built, Amber, which was the first dollar cost averaging app in the world for Bitcoin only. man, I probably put 10, 15, 20 Bitcoin into that stupid thing in the beginning because, you know, Bitcoin was around $1,000 at the time, or $2,000 or $3,000, whatever it was, right? So I like invested a bunch of my money. I'm never going to see that fucking Bitcoin back. Like if I'm lucky, I might make 5 Bitcoin back out of the 20 I spent, right? But building that company opened up doors to the Bitcoin community, to Max and Stacy, to, you know, Ross Stevens writing my fucking foreword, to Michael Saylor, to like, it opened up doors that would never have been opened up before. So in my mind, that's far more valuable than I stacked another 10 Bitcoin. Congratulations, right? Like you need to, like, it takes time to build a monetary stack, but you know what also takes time? To build a reputation. And money alone can't buy your reputation. That's something that I think has been lost in the modern world. I have a whole chapter in the book on this, is that what can money not buy specifically? And it's honor and reputation. And this is something like it reminds me of the sort of Japanese culture when the West first came to Japan. There was this whole, the West came to trade. And the Japanese kind of looked down on trade as something that was reserved for the merchant class. And in Japanese feudal society, the merchant class was below the peasants because merchants were generally the people who just traded anything, and they would trade honor, they would trade promises, they would trade anything for silver, right? Whereas the samurai, they considered money and trade below them. Now, granted, this may have cost them long term, right? So there has to be a way to unite the two, which is what I try and do in the book. But they considered honor as the highest ideal, and you would not sell your honor or your reputation, which was, your name effectively, for anything. There was no price to that. And I think that's been lost on the materialist world. This is why I'm no longer like a libertarian or like a pure Austro-economist and stuff like this, because the emphasis is all on the material economic world. But beauty and goodness, for example, transcend, like beauty, truth, and goodness transcend the economic realm. You need it. Like economics and the monetary realm is absolutely fundamental because it's the basis of reality. So you need to recognize it, but you need to transcend above it. And I almost think I had this like crazy dream when maybe it was like 6 months ago or a year ago. And like I woke up and I wrote down like this idea, which was, if economics is kind of like the mean, right? And that's the realm of like Austrian economists, right? Like the Rothbardians and all that sort of stuff. And they recognize that you cannot deviate from praxeology because that's where reality is. The left is the deviation from praxeological reality towards death, destruction, and entropy, whereas the right is the deviation from praxeology towards greatness, heights, and beauty, right? It's a king builds a palace not because he fucking needs 60 rooms, but because he can, right? Elon Musk doesn't need to go to fucking Mars, but he builds the rockets because he can. Bukele doesn't need to sit here and risk his life to like save Salvador, but he does it because he can. So I think the true mark of greatness is the ability to go beyond economic rationale to produce something that doesn't make economic sense today. Like if I'm going to build a cathedral for 300 years, it doesn't make economic sense. Like if the pencil pushers sat there and decided on that shit, they'd be like, it's not worth it. We should just build out of cheap materials just to make sure that we can make a maximum profit. No, like beauty, greatness are a deviation from economic reality, but to the right. Whereas, communism is like to the left. Anyway, it was a brain fart of an idea. I think there's a thread there.
I think so too. My question off of that is, does it need to be within a framework? Can the right go too far extreme where their ascent to greatness is actually corrosive and corruptive?
It can happen, exactly. So he, like, once again, another principle that I've come to realize the older I get is that everything has a trade-off. And the trade-off is the one you need to pick, right? So the left, for example, is far more, like, it's over-indexed on compassion, right? And when you over-index on compassion, then you let everybody in. No, we don't need any borders. We're all one. We're all in this together, right? And then like when you over-index on that shit too much, you turn society into a fucking nursing home, basically, right? On the other end, if you over-index for purely like excellence and that's it, and you discard everything else, it's kind of like a really narrow, sorry, not a narrow, it's like a really steep mountain, right? And the word excellence, you'll find, when you get to the stage in the book where I go through excellence as a virtue, there's the etymology of the word excellence, and it means to the mountain separating itself from the plains. That's what the word etymologically means. Now, the greater the excellence, the steeper the mountain. Mount Everest ain't that fucking comfortable to live on, right? So you do need to somehow, I don't want to say balance because it's the wrong word. You need to temper these things in such a way. And that's why I think the samurai, what they had with the Bushido was this constellation of virtues, which in many ways tempered each other, right? So compassion tempers justice. Self-restraint tempers courage, right? Duty tempers loyalty, right? So these things have some sort of, I don't want to say an opposite relationship, but they all have a polarity, and there's, you know, some sort of constellation or fabric is created, and it gives you, as you said earlier, a framework for the best possible life or the best possible version of civilization building. Like the third virtue in here is compassion, like because that is still important, but it can't be the only one, right? So you need all of them. So anyway, to your point, if you go too extreme on the right, you under-index for compassion, you over-index for excellence, and that can be a very harsh environment.
Yeah. So this book, the Bushido book, Bitcoin, is it kind of a calling to Bitcoiners to revive their warrior spirit?
Yeah, 100%. I think the archetype that has been lost in civilization over the last 150 years has been the warrior. And a lot of that, I mean, we can go into conspiracy theories, but I don't want to. But, you know, World War I, World War II was an attempt to wipe out as much of that as possible, right? Mm. And what's replaced the warrior is the soldier. And the warrior and the soldier are two different kind of people, right? The warrior is the one who defends, protects, conquers, claims. The soldier is the one who follows orders. Now, granted, many soldiers have a warrior spirit, but they've been turned into pawns for a meat grinder. And I mean, part of that is a function of how technology's evolved, how society's evolved, how the state's evolved, central banking. You know, there's many reasons. There's no sort of like one clear cut, this is why it happened. And it's not all conspiracy. Much of it is, you know, the transformation of civilization. But the warrior archetype, or the blood of the warrior, lives inside a number of us. Those of us who have a predisposition to want to fight or to want to stand up. You know, like if you were someone who during the corona scam was being told to put your mask on and you actively put it down and fucking spat in their face. Like, I mean, I got arrested on 4 fucking planes because I refused under any circumstances to put a fucking mask on. So if you were one of those, you probably have some sort of warrior blood in you, right? So for me, this is an attempt to rekindle that. This book's gonna piss more people off than I think it'll inspire. But that's fine because I want to separate from those people, and I want to make a calling to those, to the ones that will hear this message, to the ones that this book was written for, essentially. So yes, it's a calling to those. And I made it Bushido of Bitcoin, not because all of those people are going to be Bitcoiners, but because Bitcoiners are probably going to be socioeconomically extremely influential. And hopefully I can talk to the Bitcoiners who have that warrior blood in them to remind them that, hey, there's something more than just how much money you have and how many sats you've stacked. There's these other things that matter.
I really like how, well, in this sample chapter, the only thing I've read so far, it kind of to your point is if it's necessary to bring out that warrior within us again. And, you know, back in those days of wearing the mask and all that, man, I remember just like my blood boiling and just, you know, and a part of me being like, I can't ignore this. I can't refuse it. In fact, I remember telling my wife, after the mask mandates had kind of gone away and then Alex Jones started saying they're going to come back, I told her, like, look, like we're about to travel to Argentina, you know, if they do this, I'm not wearing a mask. I'll let them arrest me. You know, we need to make preparations for you and the kids to figure it out. Cause I literally just can't do it anymore. Like it's deep. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I hear you loud and clear. Like there is a large population of people, probably predominantly Bitcoiners or Bitcoin spirited, that are ready to receive this message. So in this first chapter, you mention how the leaders and first movers who adopt this Silicon Age Bushido as their code, who live with it, lead with it, and win with it, will get ahead. People will watch, they will see, they will learn. And when people see that winning requires a new set of behaviors, they will mimetically follow and emulate. FOMO kicks in. People change and they don't even consciously know why they're changing. It's an incredible thing to witness. So I think what's interesting, and going back to your thread about the materialist perspective on like Bitcoin, life, wealth, economic, and looking more at like the transcendental or the spiritual side of things, it's like Bitcoin is almost like that signifier in the material realm of these values and virtues that I would like this warrior class coming out is beginning to embody. Am I explaining that?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And that was part of the original thesis. I'm not so convinced on it though anymore. I don't know if Bitcoin is that representative of that. I think Bitcoin's job is to act as this heartbeat and a incorruptible monetary framework. The excellence then is up to us. And the excellence, like, I don't necessarily think Bitcoin, like represents compassion. I mean, maybe it does. I don't know. There's at the end of each book, I try and tie it to Bitcoin. So you could be right. I just don't know if it's as pronounced as we've all believed.
Sure. I think that's part of the cult aspect of Bitcoin. But, I guess what I would say is it perhaps a unifier, or could it be a catalyst, or could it simply be something happening at the same time?
It's clearly a catalyst, right? So the definition I try and give about Bitcoin today, when people ask me what it is, I call it a framework for excellence, right? Because granted, to your point, Bitcoin, there's no fucking rewind button. Like I've got a quote in there, which is, if reality can be defined as that which cannot be rewound, Bitcoin is the realest money we've ever had, right? Like, in fact, all other money by that definition is fake. Like, Bitcoin's the only real money, because like if I send it to you and I forget a fucking letter, it's gone. There's no like helpline or Satoshi come, refund my money for me. It's gone. It's done. So in that sense, what that does is it forces you to think twice. It forces you to be more responsible, and it also punishes good behavior while rewarding bad behavior. Sorry, fucking wrong way around. Punishes bad behavior while rewards good behavior, right? Which ideally leads to more excellence. So that's the hypothesis. And I think in time that will happen, but we have to like force that through, right? Like we need to do that.
So what I got from what Jordan just said is it more likely that the warrior class that emerges now, right, that rekindles that spirit, is it more likely that it emerges from the Bitcoin space just because Bitcoin naturally selects for those type of personalities?
Maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, because in fact, I've found more courageous warriors outside of Bitcoin than I have inside, at least in the last year and a half while I've been outside of Bitcoin. I don't know if that's changed. Now, there is definitely bright spots, like you guys. There's, Lex, Bitcoin Mechanic, Francis, like, John Ballas. Like, I've got a couple. I've probably got like 20 people who I would be confident, for example, if the goblins and the fucking orcs were coming, I'd be like, all right, I got these boys with me, right? But in the other spaces that I've been digging, I found like probably 50. Like, so the ratio is higher elsewhere. And what I'm interested now, and that's what I hope this book will do, is I want to fucking orange pill those guys, because they're the fucking next level.
Got you. And so in terms of that, right? Like, okay, well, let me change the subjects a little bit. Let me go to Nietzsche real quick and the will to power. And let me talk about Elon Musk and that example that you said, where he's swerving off the road and taking civilization on different. Is that an example of will to power? Him buying Twitter and saying, hey, I'm going to take control and I'm going to impose my will on reality and take this civilization to, a place that I believe is more virtuous.
Yes. I think the best definition for will to power is life force, right? Life force. Like the way I try and explain it in the book is human beings are made up of multiple drives. We don't understand really where those drives come from, right? Like we have a drive for hunger, for eating, for sex, for creation, for production, for beauty, for travel, for claiming space. Like we have all these drives, right? We have a drive to, some people have a drive to write, to draw, right? All of these things. We're a bundle of drives. The will to power is sort of like the life force that either has the strength or the capacity to align these drives in a direction or not, right? Some people can channel this kind of will to power. So clearly, Elon has many, many fucking drives, right? And he's got the capacity to channel that. Other people may have those similar drives, but may not possess or may not have cultivated that will to actually go and do that. So that's kind of how I think of it. And the manifestation of that will to power of Elon in particular, the manifestation of that is SpaceX, X, Starlink, Tesla, all these sort of things. Trump's manifestation of his will to power is leading America out of the dark ages.
So I guess this leads to my next question. This drive, right? And the many drives that we have, right? Where does that come from? Is that kind of bestowed upon you by God, like the slice of divine?
I think so.
And okay.
Yeah.
And then my next question is Nietzsche and then Christianity, right? Are those two necessarily opposing viewpoints?
I don't think so. In the book, I make a case for what I like to think of as Christo-Hopper-Nietzscheanism. So it's kind of like what I consider the ultimate Venn diagram. So Hopper is the ultimate Austrian. Christianity is the ultimate form of ethics and religion. And Nietzscheanism is the ultimate form of reaching for vitality, greatness, etc. And I think the Venn diagram amongst those three is the ideal place. So many people will say, oh, Nietzsche hated Christianity, this and that. No, I think what Nietzsche hated was what Christianity had become, right? And Christianity made way for the woke virus. Christianity made way for, the institution of Christianity, what it had become, planted the seeds for a lot of the decline of the West that we saw today. Like Nietzsche was a prophet in the sense that he foresaw that we would reach the age where the West started to fall because of institutions like democracy. Nietzsche hated democracy. He beat the shit out of it when he was around. He hated this idea of giving every man the same voice, right? He knew that there was a difference between those who chose greatness and those who wanted mediocrity and a handout. So he kind of warned of these things. And one of my favorite predictions of his was do you remember the Remnant essays that I did back in the day, and how I talked about like the lemmings and like the masses and they don't matter and shit like that? So this was before I discovered any of Nietzsche's stuff. Like I found my way to a similar conclusion. What he predicted, now remember, he predicted this in the golden age of Europe, peak civilization of Europe, like Beethoven, Wagner, like these people were, Goethe and all this sort of stuff. Like it was peak civilization. He's like, this shit's all gonna come fucking crashing down in the next century or two, right? And people were like, you're a fucking madman, you're a moron, right? And he said this and this and this and this and this is why it's going to come crashing down. And one of the greatest predictions he made was what he called like the last man. And the last man is basically the lemming. He's characterized by sarcasm. He's characterized by wanting to bring down greatness, to scoff at greatness, to be like, well, why would you do that? He's characterized by a desire for average and a allergicness to that's not the right word, but he's characterized by being allergic to heroism or to beauty or to the ideal. The last man wants to basically be the guy who is sheltered by the state, by the institutions, by whatever kind of can keep him numb to greatness or numb to struggle or numb to pain and suffering and freedom. Because Nietzsche kind of compares war and struggle to freedom. Like if you want to be free, you need to be willing to struggle, right? So anyway, he predicted all of this stuff, and he basically laid out the case for what would become the mask Nazis, right? Like the people, the zombies who would just fucking wear it because they were told to, right? Like all this sort of stuff. So anyway, long way of saying that Nietzsche's problem with Christianity was less to do with the Christian principles and more to do with what Christianity had become in its institutionalization, and some of the ideals or some of the principles that I think planted seeds that ultimately made the West weak.
Gotcha.
Wow.
So if I can, I'm just going to go a little bit through my journey, and then maybe you can analyze it, or I guess, and based off of what you've discovered in your book, because it's my journey into discovering my warrior spirit. And it's happened during COVID, and it was seeing what was happening in the world, seeing the tyranny take place, and seeing no one really stand up to it. No one in my community, no one in none of my friends, and no one really even out there in the political realm or anything like that. And I became frustrated, and I wanted to do something. I wanted to rally the troops. I wanted to speak out, but I realized I don't have any of these qualities or characteristics of a man. That I don't have the skill set. I don't have the confidence. I don't have what it takes to be a leader and to even communicate my frustration with what's going on in the world, or why it's even wrong, right? And so I took a hard look at myself, and I said, well, I either stay here in this mediocre position, or I try to like level up. I try to ascend. I try to search for my greatness. And that's what I did. So, you know, I found the archetypes. This is the first time I've discovered the archetypes, and king, warrior, magician, lover. And I realized, oh man, I've never cultivated my warrior spirit before. Started training MMA, started, you know, doing things in order to activate the neural pathways that would energize the warrior spirit within me.
Awaken the sleeping lion.
Yes. Take on challenges, right? You know, put myself out there, start speaking up, start actually having conversations where I wouldn't just get frustrated, but actually try to communicate my position and so forth. And over time, like I just became, you know, I just became a better man, a better warrior. And I realized, oh, this is something that everyone has in them, but so many people just dismiss the calling, right?
Well, maybe not everyone. See, this is also something I've come up with. I don't think it's everyone. You're an anomaly. You're unique because you have that in you. You were just asleep. It was dormant. It needed to be woken up out of you. I think, honestly, probably most people don't have it.
Really?
In fact, yeah, I think most people are just wired to be peasants, or to be followers, to be lemmings, to do all that sort of stuff.
You think so? You think that's that? It's not just buried? You think that's really the wiring?
Yeah, honestly.
Is it genetic or is it spiritual? What do you see it?
Karmic?
Who knows? Karmic, spiritual, biological. I think it's a mixture of those things, honestly.
Interesting.
Some people have this predisposition, honestly. Like, you know, there's nature versus nurture, man. Like, you can only nurture so much. I think nature is quite varied, and this is why feudalism worked so well. Like, feudalism understood that, you know, John Smith was a smith, and he was an artisan, and he made the swords, but he did not know how to wield the swords. He wasn't intellectually, physically, emotionally built for that. But there was a warrior class that were, and the warrior class was bred, man. Like, the samurais were taller than every other Japanese. They were bigger, they were stronger. Same as the knights in Europe. They were bigger, they were stronger, they were different. They had the capacity to kill someone, whereas the peasant rarely did, right? So I honestly think not everyone has it. So anyway, I'm sorry to derail your story, but
no, but yeah, it's basically concluded. But it was just one of those things where I realized, okay, this is something that was never within me, and then I had to go out there and actually cultivate it through like experience and challenge and become dangerous, right?
You were a lion, but you were asleep. Some people are sheep; they cannot become lions.
Interesting.
That's my conclusion.
That's interesting. It's funny because pre-COVID, I was shouting out about things, and I was pretty vocal and confident. I want to talk about violence in a minute, but before I talk about that, like, then COVID happened right at the time I became a father.
Okay.
And I was feeling so fragile and just kind of insecure, vulnerable in this new realm where I shut the fuck up. I was like, I can't be put in any kind of position of, and then eventually I started to feel that, that pressure. I was like, okay, it's time to make decisions. But when we talk about this new neo warrior class, or I don't know if you have a name for it, like in today's age, but and the concepts of violence, and if we link it back to Bitcoin, we talk about how Bitcoin can kind of bring us away from violence, especially like at a nation state level. What is the outlook, or where do we see violence in the traditional sense fitting into this? Like Mike mentioned, learning how to fight. Obviously we talk about Second Amendment stuff, and obviously samurais, swords. And now we look at us waking up. Like, should we be expecting to like go get ourselves into like violent bloodbaths kind of thing, or is it something that's more internal? I've heard violence described as a way of like, it's the act of reclaiming space. It could be as simple as a look in your eyes. It doesn't have to be anything actually physical. Violence can manifest in different realms. So I'm curious what your take on this, if it's like kind of mentioned in the book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. We have become bloody.
That's the end. Look, honestly, it's gonna require violence on multiple dimensions. Honestly, I think we've been taught to shy away from violence for too long. And the thing is, I'm hoping that there'll be more measured and controlled violence, because that's essentially what a warrior was, right? He was like a samurai was a trained weapon, not just someone with a fucking pitchfork flying around, right? Like it's very different. And that means like having the capacity for violence, like first of all, is extremely necessary, but the ability to not just have a capacity, but to actually be violent if it does become necessary, that's a different level, right? And all of our callings, all of our paths are going to be different. Some of us may be called to a more bloody version of it. Some of us may be called to a more spiritual version of it. I don't know. Once again, my hope is that it's going to be moved more in the direction. I actually have a whole chapter on violence in the book.
Cool.
Discussing a specific thing.
Well, I got a question on the violence thing, right? And so I'm not 100%. I'm not bought into what you just said, but it's interesting. And the first thing that came to my mind was Bukele and what he's done over here, right? In terms of his leadership and using the military in order to round up the hoodlums and the gangsters running around. Is that what you're talking about when you say
that's
the
controlled violence?
Okay.
Yeah, that's controlled violence. That's what I mean. Like, and there's, they didn't get these guys and say, "Hey, come give me a hug. Let's walk over here together." It's like they took them at fucking gunpoint, right? Like that is a violent way to do it, but it needs to be done. And this is like, again, the father is the violent archetype in the family, or has the capacity for violence. But again, it's all about how you direct it and how you control it. Like, you don't go and be violent with the people you love and beat up your fucking kids, right? That's not what I'm talking about here. Like, just to be very clear, it's being able to be violent when it matters. Like a lion, right? A lion is extremely fucking violent, but it's a majestic creature. It doesn't just go around fucking eating everything. It takes down, it kills what it needs to kill, and it eats it. And it's a violent process. Like, and this is the thing, like, we've been distanced from a lot of violence. Like, we used to hunt and kill our food. Now we go to the shop and it's all in plastic wrappers and shit like that. We don't see the food. We don't see anything, right? So like, we've been distanced from it.
It's almost uncomfortable to talk about it.
Exactly. Exactly. It really is. Yeah. It's uncomfortable to discuss these things. But like, violence is the underlying, like, violence underlies all of civilization. It ain't going away.
Is it like that, I think it was a Jordan Peterson meme, where he's talking about, a dangerous man. Is that basically the idea?
It's
like
related, absolutely.
Yeah. So like, it is the capacity to be dangerous, or the capacity to exert force.
Exactly. That is absolutely fundamental. And that's the minimum standard, but what I'm talking about is even a step further, which is the recognition that everything in life exists with an undertone of violence. Like, force is the universal currency. Like, when it comes down to it, like, we can talk, we can trade, but really what ends up actually moving things when push comes to shove is the push. Like, it is the gunpoint. Like, force is the universal language that everybody understands. Smart, dumb, sentient, non-sentient, whatever. Force is the universal language.
Do you think that Bitcoin changes that?
Absolutely not.
You don't think it changes the logic of violence, like maybe deters people from violence because the fact that this, new digital asset is basically unconfiscatable?
Someone needs to protect the miners. You need to protect your fucking keys. Like, so it makes it more directed. It allows you to have other options because, like, when I say violence underlies everything or force is the universal language, doesn't mean that you always need to resort to your base. You know what I mean? Like, so when you have, like, so let's even think about economics. Economics is a meta of force, right? Because when you increase your economic strength, you have more to be potentially violent with. You also have a greater need to be potentially violent so that you can protect your economic wealth. Private property, for example, exists insofar as it can be defended. Private property doesn't exist outside of the capacity to defend it. And the capacity to defend it is the ability to exert force, right? So force really underlies everything. We have abstractions for force.
It's funny because this is related to this, not necessarily like a tangent, but like related. But I was just thinking about governments and how my views have changed on governments. And I was thinking about here in El Salvador and how, Bukele has basically created a safety zone, right? A place where people can operate and do business and feel safe and secure with their family and their creations. And it made me start to think of government as a service provider.
100%.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, cool. If Bukele wants to protect this region, but allow me to create and be an entrepreneur, like, yeah, I'll pay for his protection for sure.
That's it.
So I want to tie something into the interregnum. Interregnum, how do you say it?
Interregnum. Can I just respond to this really quickly before we jump onto that? Yeah, because I just want to say, like, once again, Bukele's ability to the word inflict is the wrong one, but to like make controlled violence happen, right? Like, so Bukele's ability to enact controlled violence, that's what I'm looking for, creates the framework for cooperation, language, money, economics, to be the means via which we transact, but it is still underlied by the fact that he has a monopoly on violence here. And he provides the space.
Yeah, you need guards surrounding the territory, 100%. Right?
And this is what the warriors always represented. The warriors are like the white blood cells in a civilization. That's what they acted as, so that the peasants, the artisans, the merchants, and all this sort of stuff could operate. Because you remove the warriors, you have no boundary, you have no barrier. The cell of the body political, the cell of the body of society would be open to infection.
When we go back to real quick, let me just get this one point and we'll go to you started. But it's an interesting thread because when you talk about World War I and World War II, getting rid of the warrior class, and your thesis basically posits that warriors are they're not how can I say it? They're not in that warrior spirit is not in everyone, right? It's either genetic or spiritual or whatever. Not everyone has it. So, and then you said World War I and World War II basically got rid of a lot of the warrior class, right? And it's an interesting theory that I had as well. It's like, hey, how do we get rid of all these protectors of society? It's like, let's create a war and let's all have them go. Because if you think about who's on the front lines, it's the
bravest.
It's the bravest, yeah. And the most courageous and the people that embody all of the virtues of a warrior. And so, boom, you wipe them all out. Now you got free reign to impose your communism on a once, prosperous nation.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, especially like World War I, you could make so many arguments that it was such a pointless war. It's so bloody. Okay, so this all ties together. I mean, there's a lot of threads we're all interweaving, right? Okay, so let me see if I can do this. Violence. There is a narrative out there that we live in a time where, especially in the West, we're safe. Things are secure. Is that perhaps is that an illusion due to fiat society? Because we've lost the warrior class, or at least it's, decayed seriously in the last 100 years. So the first thing, yeah. What do you think about that? Is that true, or is that just a falsity?
Yeah, I think we're more so under the illusion of safety. What we've basically done is we've distanced ourselves conveniently from the violence that still exists all over the world, like slaughterhouses and wars in fucking Ukraine and Syria, this and that, and like we're watching Netflix now, and we're going to Whole Foods. So it's like we distance ourselves from it. Doesn't mean there's less violence. It's just been moved elsewhere.
So
Yeah.
right. So if we can see it on the camera, this is the interregnum for anyone that hasn't seen the book, and it's an awesome little diagram here. So as I see it, the fiat decline, right? Pre-2000, and then we ascent to the Bitcoin standard. It's almost like on this side here, on the right, in this fiat stage, it's this illusion of safety and security and all that. And it makes me wonder if once we get to the other side, I think you say it's a few decades away.
Yeah, maybe longer.
Maybe longer. Is it security at that point? Is it mutual respect because the warriors have woken up? Like what do they say? An armed society is a polite society.
Yeah.
And then in the middle there of the interregnum is, and this is kind of where it becomes loaded with all the threads going on, is that's like the chaos, tumultuous place, as you say in this intro, right? And so when we talk about violence, when we talk about anything that could happen in any realm, right? Where does jurisdiction play a role? So, for example, if we're choosing to be in El Salvador, right, because we want to pay the subscription fee to live here because we believe in the protection, right? Does that theoretically mitigate a certain kind of violence, but perhaps give more weight to another kind of violence?
Yeah, it's a trade-off. Yeah.
Right. And so once again, I look at it more like a karmic perspective. It's like, or maybe it's just all personal and this transcendence of jurisdiction. And this is really just like a crazy new evolution of humanity, maybe even Darwinistic in a sense, where only the strong will survive. And it's not just strong physically, materially, it's strong spiritually, mentally, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think so to try and tie that into what you said, because I don't know what the question was at the end.
Yeah, I don't know either.
It's all good.
It's just a point I want to explore.
It was a good weaving. So let me see if I can play with this. So the idea of the interregnum is this thing that, look, we have a current paradigm now, and the socioeconomic paradigm is shifting. So like you've actually got the old cover here. If you look at the new cover, it says a code of virtue for a world on a new economic standard.
Uh-huh.
And I was going to write socioeconomic, but I leave that for the book. So instead of just a code of virtue for a Bitcoin standard, because that's how I kind of envision Bitcoin. It's a new socioeconomic standard. That's like, it changes the monetary base, and it changes the resources, or it changes the way society deals with resources, right? So that's very, very, very significant. Now, if you change the playing field, you got to change the rules of the game. And I think the rules of the game in the current paradigm that we're living in are about, lying, cheating, stealing, fucking being a parasite, being a bureaucrat, like, the longhouse, HR, safety, fiat, all that sort of stuff, right? When we sort of move more towards the Bitcoin standard, we have a more raw, honest, organic, socioeconomic paradigm. And that will bring some things to the surface that we're going to need to find ways to deal with, right? It will probably, force the privatization of a lot of things. So, these sort of violence will move to different areas. Doesn't mean violence is going to disappear. It'll be, as I said, more controlled, more directed, more economically rational. But one of the glaring differences between current paradigm and future paradigm will be the playbook in order to win on that socioeconomic paradigm, which probably will be harder to cheat, harder to lie, harder to steal, harder to be a parasite, harder to be a bureaucrat, harder to do all that sort of stuff, which means ideally it will incentivize that there's a natural incentive towards behaviors that move you more towards excellence or winning, which is kind of why I kind of think of the book almost as a playbook. It's a playbook for a world on a new socioeconomic standard, right? If you want to win on that standard, this is how you need to behave. If you want to win on the fiat standard, go fucking lie, cheat, get into politics, whatever, right? And then finally, just quickly, the interregnum is going to be where these two values, these two models clash. And I don't know how long that's going to take. And what it means also is that the interregnum is going to be quite messy, because there's going to be arbitrage opportunities on both sides. That's what shitcoining is.
Isn't that
Shitcoining
what's happening right now? I feel like it's clashing right now.
Exactly. We are
What
right in the
Sailor's
middle of
doing.
the interregnum. Yeah. Like the interregnum started in 2008. And we're right in the middle of that shit, and this stuff is clashing. Now you've got this Trump win, Elon Musk, everything like that. We can't rest on our laurels, right? So like things are coming up, but at the same time, you see fucking Europe's falling, Brazil's run by commies now, like half of Latin America, in fact, is run by commies and all this sort of stuff. So like, just because we've had a couple like really strong wins now, doesn't mean the light has overtaken the darkness yet, right? So like the battle continues, and the interregnum will continue until we end up on that standard. I just don't know how long it's going to take.
Sorry.
Well, just based off what you were saying, do you, I had this concern that Trump's win then again breeds complacency within the warrior class. Like, okay, our guy's in, so we can just kind of take a back seat, relax, everything's going to be all good.
Yeah, well, we can't. So it's incumbent on us to remind each other and remind our fellow warriors that now is not the time to relax. We won a battle, but the war is not over, right?
Can you be a warrior? Sorry, Jordan, but this is an awesome conversation. Can you be a warrior though and be like a creative warrior? Like, is it all about destruction and violence, or is it also about creation and
The capacity for the violence.
Yeah. Like it's and like when I talk about violence, once again, it's not about like creation is a destructive thing, right? When you create something, you necessarily destroy something else, right? Like, so that's why the term creative destruction exists. Creation is fucking violent. Like the sperm that enters the vagina and has to swim up is violently fucking killed off by the acids inside the vagina until it makes its way to the fallopian tube. And then one of those motherfuckers has to enter the egg. Like millions of sperm have to die just to make it there. Life creation is fucking violent. So a warrior recognizes that and doesn't shy away from it. That's the message. That's the moral of the story here. So to be creative, you need to be violent.
Yeah, so I was just going to take it back to Trump and Elon. So there's a lot of talk out there, I guess you'd say psyops, right? So Trump, blah, 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 it's not real. It's more whatever, more wars, more... and Elon, it's all just about going to this AI-controlled Neuralink future. And when we were mentioning, what was it? The not free will, what do we call it? The life force energy. The will to power. Elon is doing this. Trump is doing this. Does that... what's the word here? Like interrupt. Like if there is hidden nefarious agendas, for example, does that interrupt the will to power, or does it just amplify it in a certain tone, so to speak? So for example, if Donald Trump is a psyop, what does that say about his will to power? Or Elon Musk?
I mean, the thing is, everyone has a will to power. So it's like, whose will to power is greater? Is it the Yuval Harari's World Economic Forum fucking commies, or is it our side? And that's the thing. Like and this is what Nietzsche was talking about, is like, he with the greatest will to power will win. So if you sit there and like cower away, nothing's going to happen. So we just need to become stronger. We need to become better. We need to become more powerful. We need to wield more energy. We need to channel more energy. We need to be more powerful than our enemies.
Would you say that was almost represented by the last election? Like everyone going out to vote for Trump, for example? Was that an example of this?
Yeah, it was like people actually claiming that and being like, fuck, we got to do this. And they got behind the message, right? Like when he got up after fucking getting shot, like it was incredible, right? Like that shit you can't fake. Like that's not fakeable stuff. Like, a bullet doesn't just fucking graze your ear and, you're going to put yourself in front of that shit.
It was planned. Yeah.
Yeah, like people who think that are fucking out of their minds, never shot a gun properly. So like, that catalyzed something in people. And it proved, again, my thesis is that not everyone has the same capacity to be that warrior or be that leader, but people recognize it in the same way as, for centuries, when the samurai would pass through town on a road, the peasants, everybody would stop what they're doing and they would bow to the warrior class as the procession went through, because there was a respect. It wasn't, they're forcing me to do this. There was a respect for that. So people have a reverence for greatness and for leadership, and we're starving for that shit because we've been told for the last fucking 50 years that being great, that being noble, that being aristocratic, that being strong, that being powerful is evil, right? They fed us this fucking lie. My most hated lie of all is that power is evil, that power corrupts. It's completely false.
And even like it's just like not cool to have reverence for a leader.
Exactly.
Like I always imagine,
kill your heroes. Fuck off.
I always imagine like if I ever meet Bukele, I want to like touch his feet. Like in India, you do that as you know what I mean?
Shit.
No, but I wouldn't do that because it would be weird in our society. But my point is, I would like to display reverence, like Wayne's World. We're not worthy. We're not worthy. But because I think it's important. We don't display reverence in our society, and I think it's important. Like to come back to that.
Well, I did not know that. That's interesting.
What?
That you want
That I would touch Bukele's feet? No,
Mike's going to make you do that every time you enter the house. He's going to be waiting there. Motherfucker, my feet ain't being touched.
Well, it's like what you're saying about, the peasants,
Yeah, of course, of course,
bowing,
of course,
taking
of course.
kneeling for the samurai.
100%. I mean, the samurai would bow amongst each other, like
All
when
right.
they came to each other.
I got some questions
Let's go.
because I'm not. Yeah. All right, so going back to my story, right? Like, hey, I needed to awaken the warrior spirit, and then I kind of found like my will to power. I was like, okay, I need to create my vision and go after it, and create this world that I want to live in, right? And I've been doing that ever since. But a lot of that inspiration, a lot of that comes from my Christian faith,
Yes.
right? And so I guess two questions from that. Number one, the Bushido Bitcoin, is that kind of a guideline, a moral guideline on how to be a virtuous warrior? And two, can that be found in other realms, other texts, other sources of inspirations besides the Bushido, like for instance the Christian Bible?
Of course, absolutely. So I tried to avoid morality in the book, right? And that's why I didn't call it a moral code. I tried to focus more on virtue, because virtue is very evident, right? A virtue like courage, one could call a courageous act moral or immoral, right? But we recognize courage; it's visceral, and like a virtue is something that's very hard to hide, right? So like it's kind of like a fat person, doesn't like. He can talk about morality all he wants, but the virtues of like excellence and responsibility and stuff like that, he can't really hide, because if he's a fat cunt, he's fat for a reason, right? Because he doesn't have the virtue of excellence or the virtue of responsibility. So first of all, like I tried to avoid morality too much. Sorry, no, I tried to avoid morality in there, or discussions of morality. And I think I say in the book, like if you want a belief system or morality, read the Bible, right? Like that's where you go for something like this. I think virtue also transcends belief systems and moral frameworks. As an example, I use this in the book when during the Crusades, when the Christians were fighting Islam, you had this great respect amongst Saladin, and I can't remember who the Christian leaders were at the time, but Saladin was a man of honor, and they had different belief systems, but what transcended the belief system was the virtue of honor, the virtue of courage, the virtues of respect that they could have amongst each other. So I almost kind of put this forward. It's like, look, you can be a Christian, you can be a Muslim, you can be Buddhist, I don't know, whatever flavor of belief system you want. But there's something we can all align on, which is this code of virtue. And it's not Svetski's 10 fucking commandments, Svetski's code of virtue. This code of virtue has been extracted from cultures that came to the same conclusion across time. Like the Japanese Bushido was basically the same as the Christian chivalry. They were the fucking same thing, and they emerged from the warrior class, specifically the knights and the samurai at the same time during feudalism in two completely different parts of the world. How the fuck does that happen? The same thing emerged in Rome and in Greece and in early America. Like, so these things seem to be like, there's something there about these virtues that they're sort of like ingrained in our DNA, given to us by God.
Are they given to us by God, or is it something that evolved just through
There could be arguments.
trial and error over time and figuring out, hey, this is the virtuous way to live life. Like these are the way to live a good life. I believe that they were given to us by God, instilled in us. And that's why there is this, like, for me, drive to seek out those virtues.
I'm of that opinion too. I think we discover these, right? I think they are, it's almost like you look at the Fibonacci sequence and stuff like that. So what we find, and actually you've got that piece of art there with the Bitcoin thing right behind you, right? So we find these patterns in the universe and we discover them in the same way as we might discover the virtues.
It's
right?
like archetypes.
Exactly, like archetypes. So these things pre-exist, and that would be the argument for God bestowed these things, which I'm far more of the opinion of that than some fucking random evolution. We figured this out. But maybe through evolution, we came to discover, and through iteration, you know, because iteration is probably a better word for evolution. Through iteration, we came to discover that these acts, these behaviors, these virtues are the optimal orientation if you want a civilization that reaches, that creates beauty, that creates greatness. If you want a civilization that creates fucking sludge and HR departments and fucking seed oils and all that sort of stuff, well, you better have a different set of virtues, which are whatever the fuck we're living in today.
All right. So we got another subject to talk about, but but we could talk about this all day. That's why I got to move the show along. But like, Bushido Bitcoin, anything else you want to say about it before we move on to Satlantis?
I mean, first, just thank you, boys, for the great conversation. I was looking forward to this for a long time, honestly, because I knew I was coming to Salvador. I knew you were down here. Like, I wanted to have this conversation because I know this is like right up your alley, right up the people listening to this. It's right up their alley. And I think I was speaking to Giacomo the other day, and I was like, man, I've been writing this book for a while, and I was ahead of the zeitgeist. And I said, now this is sort of the energy floating around. I was like, now I need to fucking write the non-Bushido of Bitcoin because I like being ahead of the curve. It's like the book took too long to come out. But honestly, I think it's the right, you know, being ahead of the curve aside, I think it's the right time. It's the right book for the right time with the right energy.
What do
I
you?
think this is going to capture people.
What do you hope to inspire then? Like, what kind of world do you hope that this book inspires?
One of beauty, greatness, vitality. Like I want an ascendant world, right? And ascension requires like this fucking spirit that wants to build and climb and produce and create. Like that's the will to power. Even when I say it, like it just fucking charges me up, right?
Charges me up. I'm ready.
Seriously, like I want people to read this book, go and fucking run through walls and like
That's how I felt last night reading that first chapter. I'd love to close it off just by reading this quick passage, which I think sums up how we perceive like sovereignty. The noble type, the hero of the future, will have the capacity to bring together in a life-promoting manner the ferocious courage that creates and bends the external realm to his will, along with the self-conscious intellect necessary to command his inner world. This is the tension between opposites that makes life, and which draws tight the bow. That just got me so jazzed up to read.
Yeah, bro. Can't believe I wrote that shit. Sometimes I listen back to this stuff, I'm like, damn, bro, who the fuck wrote that?
Yeah, so if we're not going to talk about it anymore, yeah, I'm excited to read it. Thank you for writing it. Thank you for the inspiration. I'm sure plenty of others think the same thing.
It's so a term that I often use is like brute forcing reality. Like sometimes the way things have gone for me in the last year or two kind of feels like, oh man, like things are just happening, right? And they're happening, and they're transpiring in a way that I couldn't even have dreamed of. But in a way, it's all through my action, through waking up every day and consistently working hard. Yeah. Is that kind of the will to power that you're talking about there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There it is. That's a manifestation of it. Yeah.
Awesome. So let's talk about Satlantis. Your project, you're out.
I gotta tap out. I gotta go put the kids to bed.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us, man. It's a pleasure chatting.
Thank you. Really
awesome.
appreciate it.
All right, cool. So Yeah. Let's just get a quick summary of that then.
Let's do it. Yeah. So Satlantis. You guys are Sovereignty Studios, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've been nomading for 5 years. We're all sitting here talking about how Bitcoin, in an economic sense, gives you more sovereignty in that dimension. And then the idea then is to build sovereignty across multiple other dimensions: food, defense, relationship, family, living, all this sort of stuff, right? And there's a big world out there. There's a big world, and there's different places, and there's different people and communities that are seeking this out, right? Like this, like my guess would be, if you kind of like mix together people who fit the sovereign individual bill, Bitcoiners, nomads, remote workers, flag theorists, arbiters, like if you kind of like combine all those, probably 100 million people interested in the confluence of these ideas, right? Like, and they're the people that are interested in eating fucking carnivore, or getting raw milk delivered directly, and going to farmers markets, and doing these sort of retreats and hitting the saunas and all this sort of stuff.
Can I ask you just real quick about that?
Yeah.
Why is that? Is that because there is this, like, we've been exposed to all the lies and corruptions of that we've been fed over the past whatever our lives are, and now we're like on a search for truth, and so it's taking us back to what is natural and organic?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things there. That there's also the fact that many of us that fit these archetypes have the explorer archetype, not just the warrior archetype, right? Because we're all mixed up. Like,
Yep.
Thousands of years ago, the bloodlines were more separate. The explorers were more distinct from the warriors more distinct from the peasants, etc. I think that's all been mixed up. So we have multiple archetypes in us, which makes us fundamentally and potentially more powerful. It potentially also makes us weaker across a single dimension, but it makes us greater generalists, right? So again, trade-offs, right? So there's that. There's also this, as you said, this sense that we've been lied to for so long. We've been getting poisoned and all this sort of stuff. And we have blood knowledge of stuff, right? Like the blood carries far more than just nutrients, right? It carries memory. It carries knowledge that gets passed down. And we know in our blood that some things are wrong about the way we eat, about the things we're feeding ourselves, about the fucking blue lights, about all this sort of stuff. So, the inner explorer starts to discover these things. And that's where things like Twitter, I believe, once again, extremely, extremely powerful, because it creates a place where the collision of these ideas can happen, right? And then we start to discover these things. You have this phenomenon of the influencer, of the social network, and all this sort of thing pop up. So to tie that back into what the fuck Satlantis is an attempt to build, I guess, call it a super app for that archetype of person. I think the future is going to see the rise of multiple, more niche and micro social networks than just big fucking Facebook blobs, right? And these social networks, I mean, you look at Blue Sky is an example of the communist version of fucking Twitter, right? All the commies are kind of peeling off Twitter, and Blue Sky just hit 15 or 20 million users. And what is it? It's a fucking leftist shitstorm. And that's fine. Let them go there. They can fucking do that. Twitter is becoming more like the right-wing vitalist Christian discourse.
Truth
right?
Social.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
So, and Trump may as well fucking turn off Truth Social at this point because he doesn't need it anymore.
Yeah.
There's other apps like Kara, which is this kind of like Instagram for artists, which doesn't allow AI content on there. So,
Awesome.
and it's like these artists are coming up and they're like drawing shit. It's amazing. They've got like 1 million users now. So Atlantis, I want to make it the social network for this archetype of person. So I'm mixing in different features that you might find on multiple different apps. So we've got kind of like meetup.com or Luma embedded in there. Now it's a very early version. So, our events page is not as good as either of those, but you have events in there. And at some point, the events page will be more robust. So you can run either a meetup or a conference or a retreat or a fucking farmer's market or a concert, whatever, right? So we have meetup. We have the TripAdvisor element. So we have city pages, where the city pages are like an aggregate of the events, of content posted, of scores, of statistics, of merchants and all this sort of stuff. We have the merchant angle. So we pulled everything from Seed Oil Scout to rawmilk.com to fucking BTC Maps to everything. So we have the ultimate map inside there for sovereign individuals. So it's more than for just Bitcoiners. Then we kind of wrap it all together into this kind of web directory, which looks a little bit like Nomad List, but is way more powerful. You can find people, you can follow them, places, events, merchants, all this sort of stuff. And finally, we cap that off with an app that kind of looks and feels a bit like Instagram, but it's got elements in there like your info tab is almost like a link tree. You've got like collections in there if you want to share like either places you've been or the best fucking restaurants or cafes or healing centers or whatever. Like, you can make collections about whatever you want. In time, we're going to have like experience is in there in your, so imagine you had an Instagram profile and someone could click on the experiences tab, and Airbnb experiences is kind of like who I'm going after there. So people might want to do tours, like a helicopter tour. You might want to show people around Salvador or something like that. You could list experiences, you could list services. Businesses will be able to list their menus. We'll enable businesses and merchants and all that sort of stuff. We'll enable them to accept Bitcoin without even having to pitch them about fucking Bitcoin, because we're going to add them to Atlantis with a very different pitch, which is this is a network of sovereign individuals around the world that want to come and find you. Not even a fucking mention of Bitcoin. You don't need to. Bitcoin's just the default that's in there, right?
So is it like I'm trying to picture it. I've been on the website a little bit. Is it then like a social hub?
Yeah,
basically?
It's like a social, like we don't have a name for it in the same way as like when Facebook first came out, there wasn't a name. So we're kind of calling it a social directory, a social hub, a social network, kind of like matching these words.
This is built on Nostr?
We fundamentally use Nostr. So we tried to build too much of it on Nostr, honestly. And Nostr is still a baby. And, like for example, we try to put events on Nostr. We try to put the locations on Nostr. We try to put the merchants on Nostr. We try to put the cities, all that shit. And half the shit's broken. So what we've realized is we probably need to make it as Nostr as possible, meaning that the social element, the profile, the NPub, and all that sort of stuff could probably be entirely Nostr compatible. Other features may need to be Nostr compatible later. Right now we focus on the quality of the product.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's what we have to do as well, right? It's just, you got to build something that works before you can like
be a purist about it.
Yes,
exactly.
Now I'm imagining how I might use this, or the appeal for me. First of all, you go on there and you know that the events, the restaurants, the people there are all aligned on some fundamental level. Is that right?
Valued, exactly. That's the idea. That's
okay.
Like I want to attract all of those kind of people, right? So in time, I want it to be the place where, man, if you're going to fucking run a retreat like you guys just did, like that's the place. That's where you're going to get the market. And because it's intertwined with a social app, you can literally promote your event right in there. People could see your event. They can buy the ticket and like the money goes to you directly because it's Bitcoin enabled. So it's kind of like a place for sovereign creators to produce content, to build an audience, and to run their business all in one.
Now, is there an element of virality in there as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea. So that's the idea of social, is that at some point, like the best content creators will rise up, they'll create virality. And we want to create that network effect so that more and more of that stuff happens.
Awesome. I mean, that sounds awesome.
Bro, if I can pull this off, it's going to be the greatest fucking application. Like, I want to build the substrate, or I want to build the basis for the network state. Like, this is what I'm trying to do with this thing. I can imagine this in 10 years being how all of us are connected, and like we have our silo for all of this shit. Like we can, like commerce, like you can imagine marketplaces on there, like community chats, like all of this sort of stuff can kind of be plugged in there. And the thing is, this wasn't possible 10 years ago. This is possible now because technology's evolved, things have gotten better. We're at the stage with Nostr now where your identity can be a public-private key pair, so that way you own it, so you have more control over it. So a bunch of things have opened up, and more importantly, the appetite for something like this exists. Like if I built this shit 5 years ago, no one would give a fuck. Like, there was no like sovereignty movement, right? Like, no one
Do you
cared.
think it's getting bigger?
100% it's getting bigger.
Yeah.
100% it's getting bigger. So I want to tap into that shit, and I want to ultimately find the creators and start slowly bringing them across with the promise that, hey, this thing is early, it's still buggy as shit, but I'm doing every single thing I can to make this better. Like we've got some great backing now from some big investors. So we just closed our seed about 6 months ago. In about 6 to 9 months, I want to go raise a Series A, and I want to give this my best shot. Like I found my ikigai. Like I've been telling this to people. I've done many, many things, like built businesses, fucking Bitcoin Times, writing for Bitcoin Magazine, like 100,000 things. I've like eliminated everything from my life other than the Bushido of Bitcoin, which is my kind of like my passion project, like my intellectual stimulation, and Atlantis in terms of my vocation. That's it. I don't give a fuck about anything else. Cut everything else out of my life. I sold the Bitcoin Times off. I told everyone I'm not writing for, I stopped writing for Zero Hedge, for Bitcoin Magazine, for everyone. Like, that's it. It's done. This is it. Bushido and Atlantis.
Concentrating your focus on that, has that allowed you to get more shit done?
Fuck yeah, man. Like, we are going to shake the fucking world up. Not only with this book, but with Atlantis. Like, I'm going to blow people's minds with the kind of things I want to build there. Like,
yeah, it sounds awesome. And I was playing around with it a little bit. I put up my Renaissance networking night on there and stuff like that. So like in terms of like how many people come to us and ask us questions about El Salvador, between, you know, raw milk, good beef, seed oil free restaurants and stuff like that, to just be like, yeah, go check out Atlantis. And you got your whole directory over there. It would be such a time saver.
I know. I built this for me, man, because like, so the idea actually hit me. So no one actually knows this. I'm gonna say this on this podcast for the first time.
Exclusive.
I came up with the idea last year when I was in Salvador, right after adopting Bitcoin. Because last year I was doing the AI thing, right? And I was trying, like, we wanted to build like a Bitcoin AI and all this sort of stuff, but man, I couldn't figure out how to monetize it. And really, we just started becoming a service business. We were getting paid by Bitcoin companies to integrate an agent, but we were getting paid like by the hour. So it was fucking stupid. And I was like, man, I need to build a startup. And the first idea of Atlantis was actually a AI agent that you could ask, where's seed oil free, where's Bitcoin, this and that. But I realized it was the wrong UX. Like, you don't want to just chat with something. You actually want to see something visual in front of you. You know, you want to have this like experience. So the original name of the product was actually Destination Bitcoin. But as I started like thinking about this, I realized, man, this is so much more than Bitcoin. Like, fuck that. Like, this is about sovereignty. This is about something greater. So the name I stumbled onto was Atlantis, and it was a mixture of sovereign Atlantis and also Sat being the kind of the nod to Bitcoin. So that was sort of the idea, is like the sovereign Atlantis, the new place.
You know, it's interesting. So that's a cool story. But just when you mentioned, you know, it's so much more than Bitcoin, right? Like, and I've kind of gotten to that place as well, just with my life and my identity, where I was like, I need to transcend Bitcoin. Life has to be more than Bitcoin. We actually have to start building a civilization on top of it, where Bitcoin just becomes something boring in the background.
Exactly.
And so that's where Sovereignty Studios came about, because, you know, it's like empowering the individual, right? To go after their dreams and their goals through media production and events and so forth.
100%.
And yeah, I just feel like that time is almost coming for like us to like leave Bitcoin behind. It's there, it's been established, and now to build the world that, you know, Bitcoiners want to see on top of it.
100%, bro. Like, I agree with that on so many levels. It's not even funny. Like, it's important for you as a person, like, to get past that and stop fucking obsessing about Bitcoin all the time. Like, number one. Number two, it's important for us as a community to venture forth and find other things, which we've all kind of in many ways slowly been doing. It's also important for businesses to move beyond like this first phase of Bitcoin. And funny, I wrote about this about a year and a half ago. My last essay for Bitcoin Magazine was called The 3 Generations Theory. I talked about how the first generation of Bitcoin, the first 20 years, which is basically 2010 to 2030, is the speculation phase. It's and there's 3 kinds of businesses in the speculation phase: exchanges, wallets, miners. The next stage is the building or the infrastructure stage. And this is where we lay the pipes for a new civilization. And that will consist of businesses where Bitcoin is in the background. So for Atlantis, while I've got a nod to Bitcoin in the name, you won't see anything really about Bitcoin in the thing, other than when I turn on payments inside the app, every single account is Bitcoin enabled. But when I go out and sign up a merchant, for example, onto Atlantis, I don't say anything about Bitcoin. I just say, hey, we have a network of 100,000 people on Nostr who are all by default Atlantis users. Plus, we have all these sovereign individuals, all this sort of stuff. They're looking for the best restaurants, the best seed oil free places, blah, 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 all the things that I mentioned before. would you like to be listed? Would you like to claim your account? I have not gotten a single no. They're like, yep, straight away, sign me up. Where do I get in there? Boom, they're signed up. In 12 months from now, bro, when I've got 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 merchants or whatever it is from all around the world, I just enable their account to accept Bitcoin.
You just onboarded everyone to Bitcoin just like that without even mentioning the word Bitcoin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the fucking big, that's the galaxy brain idea that I have. Now, I could be completely fucking incompetent and screw all this up. I don't know. Time will tell, obviously. I think I can execute on this, but that's the plan. That's how I think we're going to really do it. Not trying to fucking just ram Bitcoin down everyone's throat. No one likes that.
Yeah. It's you meet a lot of resistance that way. It turn a lot of people off. It's off-putting. Yeah. And so same thing with Sovereignty Studios, right? It's like we want to become a Bitcoin only company, and like we're basically everything that's financial is run on Bitcoin, like 100%. Our treasury, our payments, and so forth, right? But we've just said it's not even a big deal. It's like, yeah, we've moved on. We've moved on from the fiat system. We're here in El Salvador. That's how serious we are about it. That we can, we have the legal framework to do it. But yeah, let's move on from Bitcoin. Let's actually build some cool stuff on it, and be part of that economy. So yeah, cool, dude. I can't thank you enough for coming here to the headquarters, hanging out, telling us your story, talking to us about the Bushido Bitcoin. I can't wait to read the full thing. And Atlantis, man, good luck with that. I'm on there, and so wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, my brother. Look, I want to also extend a thank you for the invite, for everything that you're doing. We've been kind of following each other around online. We met a couple years ago at Mark's thing, and it's just been great to watch you like go from strength to strength to strength. So well done. Thank you for everything, and I really appreciate the invite as well, man.
Man, I appreciate that. Thank you.